I pulled up to the Cross Estate in Hudson Valley, hands clenched on the wheel, as if grip could keep my life from sliding off the road. The iron gate looked older than the trees behind it, but the cameras were new, blinking like unblinking eyes. A guard scanned my license, then my face, then the back seat where my overnight bag sat alone. I kept thinking of my son's lunchbox on my counter and the rent notice taped to my fridge. This job was my last chance left to take. Inside the perimeter, everything felt quiet in the way money can be quiet, padded and controlled. Men in dark coats moved with the same practiced calm I remembered from courthouse hallways, the kind that says you are being measured. Mr. Walter Reed met me at the marble steps, neat as a pressed receipt. He did not waste breath on welcome. He walked me through the unspoken rules. Discretion, silence, no wandering, no questions that sounded like curiosity. I nodded like a professional, while my phone buzzed with my sitter's update. My sister was watching my son tonight, and she had promised to stay until morning. But promises in my family had a history of snapping under pressure. My ex had filed for more custody the moment he learned I was taking night work, acting like my exhaustion was evidence of neglect instead of survival. I needed steady pay, health insurance, and a lawyer who did not sigh when he heard my last name. That is how I ended up here, following Reed down a hallway of portraits and cold chandeliers. Reed opened a heavy door and the air changed, as if the room had been holding its breath for its boss. Dominic Cross stood near the window with his back half turned, suit dark, shoulders squared, stillness sharpened into command. He looked like a man who slept in fragments and controlled everything that could be broken. When he faced me, his eyes moved the way scanners moved at the gate, quick and thorough. I reminded myself to breathe, to keep my hands still, to look steady whatever came next now. He spoke about Lily the way people talk about weather when they are afraid of storms. Factual, careful, emotion locked behind technical words. 6 years old, leukemia, treatment that hit harder at night, a silence that started after her mother died and never fully lifted. He described selective mutism, like a diagnosis could explain loneliness. I listened, taking notes inside my head, while my heart did the unfair thing of softening. A sick child does that. It makes you forget your own fear for a moment. I stepped in anyway. The job details came next, delivered like terms of a contract. Nights only, for now, with day nurses handling medical updates. My role was comfort, medication schedules, and calling the on-call doctor if anything changed. Reed would assign my room, meals, and the rest of the rules. I could feel Dominic watching for hesitation, the way men like him watch for weakness. I surprised both of us by asking to meet Lily before my first shift. I did not want to enter her darkness as a stranger ever again. We moved through corridors that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper, past a closed playroom and a staircase that swallowed sound. The estate was beautiful, but it did not feel lived in. It felt paused. Reed stopped at a door painted soft blue, a small nameplate reading Lily Cross. He knocked, then opened it without waiting. The room held afternoon light trapped behind heavy curtains, stuffed animals lined with military neatness, and a canopy bed too large for a girl who had learned to be small so early. Lily sat by the window with a book open on her knees, curls falling over a face too pale for childhood. An IV port made a small bump under her sleeve. Her eyes lifted to mine, steady and quiet, like she had already decided the world asked for too much. I lowered myself to her level and introduced myself in the gentlest way I could, talking about the book, about butterflies, about how nights can feel less scary with a story. She did not answer, but she watched my hands. Dominic lingered at the doorway only long enough to confirm she was alive, then withdrew with the same tight control he wore like armor. I did not blame him yet. Grief can make cowards out of kings, and I knew what it felt like to watch someone you love suffer from a distance, because sometimes that is all you can manage. Reed guided me away, and I felt the hallway eyes again, the sense of lenses tucked into corners. My phone buzzed with my son asleep on my sister's couch. Back in the staff wing, I unpacked quietly. I washed my face, pinned my hair, and stared at my reflection until it stopped looking ready to run. This was not just a job. It was a test inside a fortress, and Lily was the fragile center everyone circled but no one truly held. I kept seeing her eyes, too old. When dusk came, I set my bag by the door and prepared to earn her trust without forcing a single word. Tonight, I would listen first and let silence answer. My first night shift began at 8, when the day nurse handed me a chart and a tired look that begged me not to complicate anything. I stepped into Lily's room with my shoes quiet and my heartbeat loud. The lamps were low, the curtains drawn, and the air smelled like sanitizer and lavender detergent. Lily sat propped against pillows, eyes open, face blank, as if she was waiting for me to fail like everyone else. I introduced myself again in a soft, ordinary way, then took the chair beside her bed and made my body still. I reminded myself silence wasn't rejection. It was her armor, not her weapon. The routine came from the chart and from instinct. I checked the time, washed my hands until they stung, and lined up meds in the order they were due. Lily watched without moving. I told her what I was doing anyway. The way I talk my son through homework, even when he pretends he doesn't care. A sip of water, a swallow, a slow breath. Between doses, I pointed out the little glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to her ceiling, faded from years of dust. I counted them softly, letting her follow with her eyes. When her lids grew heavy, I read from her book, steady and unhurried. Even the air listened. On the third night, the medicine hit her stomach like a wave. She curled on her side, knuckles white around the blanket, and the silence turned sharp. I set the basin within reach before she needed it, because kids should never have to beg for relief. When the nausea came, I held her hair back and kept my voice low, describing small, harmless things. Rain tapping the window, the heater clicking, my own breathing. Afterward, I wiped her mouth with a warm cloth and changed her pajamas without making a show of it. I didn't pity her. I treated her like she was fighting. That mattered more than any miracle. Around midnight, while Lily finally slept, I stepped into the hallway and checked my phone. A voicemail waited from my son, recorded in the whisper he uses when he thinks adults are fragile. He said he missed me, and he asked if I would be home for breakfast. And then he added the part that made my throat ache. He didn't want me to forget him the way his dad sometimes did. I listened once, then deleted it, because guilt is heavy and night work is dangerous. I went back to Lily and returned my hands to her world. Her breathing was steadier, and I promised myself I'd stay present. By the end of the first week, we had a pattern that belonged to us. At 9, I dimmed the lights. At 10, I offered crackers if she could manage them. And at 11, I read something short so her mind had a place to land. I never asked her to speak. Instead, I asked yes or no questions and waited long enough that my patience felt like a blanket. Sometimes she answered with a blink, sometimes with a tiny head tilt, sometimes by pushing a book toward the one she wanted. Those were words, just shaped differently. I kept telling her that I could learn her language in time. The breakthrough came on a night when her stomach refused everything, even water. She vomited 3 times in 1 hour, trembling afterward with the kind of exhaustion that makes children look ancient. I cleaned the basin, changed the sheets, and laid a cool cloth across her forehead. I kept my voice even, not cheerful, not scared, just steady. When the worst passed, I reached to adjust the blanket near her wrist. Lily's hand moved first. Her fingers closed around mine, not hard, but certain, like she was anchoring herself to the only thing that didn't disappear. I froze for half a breath, then relaxed into it. I stayed, wordless, grateful. After that, she began reaching for me without realizing it. A touch on my sleeve when a cramp hit, a small tug when she wanted the window cracked, a quiet insistence that I sit closer. Then came the worst night yet, when her chemo meds left her sweating and restless, unable to settle into any position. I counted her breaths with her, offering tiny sips between waves of nausea, reminding her that tired could be proof of effort. When she finally stopped shaking, I didn't read. I hummed instead, a melody that rose from somewhere old in me, one I had never taught myself. It felt like a key turning. The moment the note settled, Lily's eyes opened wider. She stared past me, at the space where sound lives. Her lips moved, barely, as if they remembered how to shape comfort even when her voice would not come. I kept humming, pretending I hadn't noticed, because I didn't want to scare it away. Her shoulders eased. The blanket rose and fell with calmer breaths. When the melody faded, the room felt heavier, like the walls were listening. I glanced toward the corners and forced myself to look away. I told myself it was nerves. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that somewhere below us, someone had just leaned closer tonight. On the second weeknight, after Lily slid into a thin sleep, I noticed the first camera because moonlight flashed on its glass. A lens the size of a pea sat in the molding above the bookshelf, aimed at the bed. Once you spot one, your eyes get trained. Another hid near the doorframe. Another sat inside a smoke detector that looked too new for the rest of the room. I kept my face neutral, like I hadn't seen anything, and I understood the rule nobody said. In this house, privacy meant control, and silence was treated like something worth collecting. I didn't report it to Mr. Reed, because men like him don't hear concern, they hear challenge. The estate already breathed through cameras, tiny black dots in hallway corners, a keypad on every staff door, guards who walked the same loops like metronomes. Even the kitchen had a screen showing the driveway, the gate, the east wing. The rules were simple. Do your job, keep your head down, don't ask why the ceiling is watching. I had lived with less obvious surveillance before, in courtrooms and cheap apartments with thin walls, but it felt personal, like the house inhaled me. Somewhere between midnight meds and the second cup of lukewarm tea, I caught myself performing calmness. My shoulders stayed low, my voice stayed steady, my movements stayed slow. Because cameras love panic. When I adjusted Lily's blanket, I did it like a nurse on a training video, not like a woman terrified of losing another child in her orbit. Lily noticed everything. Her eyes tracked my hands. She watched the water cup rise, watched the pill disappear, watched the clock tick toward the next dose. Silence did not mean absence. It meant she was collecting evidence about me right now. I kept our loop the same. Story, sips, stars. I'd read a page, pause, and let her take a tiny drink before her stomach rebelled. I'd count the faded ceiling stars again, and she'd follow with a slow blink, one per number, as if we were tethering ourselves to something predictable. After the worst nausea, I laid a cool cloth across her forehead and hummed under my breath, soft enough to be mistaken for airflow. The melody from the other night slipped out again, almost against my will. Lily didn't speak, but her mouth moved as if rehearsing the words. After that lullaby returned, the house behaved differently. A guard near Lily's door started lingering at my shift change, eyes too fixed on my face. Mr. Reed's voice turned sharper when he reminded me about schedules, like he needed to reassert ownership of the night. Twice I heard a door open down the corridor and close again without footsteps, the kind of sound that makes you look up even when you swear you won't. Once, while I washed my hands, the light on the fan clicked on, then off. I told myself it was wiring. My skin didn't believe me. I never saw Dominic on my nights, but I felt his presence in the architecture of control. The cameras weren't just security. They were a substitute for courage. I imagined him downstairs in a dark study, screens glowing, telling himself he was checking the perimeter while his daughter fought pain upstairs. I understood that kind of avoidance. When you love someone and you cannot fix what's hurting them, distance can look like protection. It is not. It is fear wearing a clean suit. Every time Lily's breathing steadied under my humming, I wondered what the man behind the screens felt. Back home, before this job, I used to stand in my son's doorway after he fell asleep and watch his chest rise, counting seconds like prayers. I did it when bills were overdue, when my ex threatened court again, when I was scared my choices would spill onto my child. Watching helped, because it let me believe I could guard him with my eyes. But it never replaced a hand on his back when he woke from a nightmare. Here, in Lily's room, I kept choosing the hand, not the distance. I stayed close enough to be a railing tonight. The next morning, I left Lily sleeping and walked downstairs for the day nurse handoff. The kitchen was busy, but conversations dipped when I entered, like someone had pressed mute. Mr. Reed watched me pour coffee, then looked away too late, as if he'd been studying my face. A guard followed at a distance that pretended to be coincidence. Crossing the main hall, I saw Dominic near the staircase, phone in hand, dressed like he hadn't slept. His gaze landed on me and held. It wasn't anger, it was measurement, sharpened by new information. Questions were coming. I braced myself. In that stare, I felt the lullaby echo like a fingerprint on glass. I held my posture professional, but my mind ran ahead, counting the gaps in my paper history and the secrets stitched into my name. Dominic didn't speak in front of staff. He didn't have to. The air carried his intention. I went upstairs and sat beside Lily again, smoothing her blanket, listening to her breathing, watching her eyelids flutter. The cameras blinked from their corners. For the first time, I wondered if the sound was on. I promised myself I wouldn't push Lily to speak, still rehearsing. I felt Dominic before I saw him, the way you feel a storm through a window pane. The hallway went too quiet at the exact moment my shift ended, like the house was holding its breath. A guard paused near the staircase, pretending to check his earpiece. Mr. Reed lingered by the archway with his hands folded, watching me watch him. I carried Lily's chart to the nurse station, steady on the outside, bracing inside for what I knew was coming. He appeared at my shoulder as I turned, not loud, just unavoidable. Dominic guided me into a small sitting room off the main hall, the kind with clean couches no one used. The door closed with a soft final sound. I noticed how he positioned himself between me and the exit, as if it was habit, not threat. His jaw flexed once, Then his face went smooth again. I kept my hands visible, like a witness, and waited for questions. His tone started almost casual, which scared me more than anger. He wanted to know where I learned the lullaby I'd hummed, and he didn't ask like a man collecting trivia. I said I'd grown up around different voices, that songs travel, that caregivers borrow comfort wherever they can find it. Even as I spoke, I felt how specific his interest was, like he already knew the answer. The way his eyes stayed on my mouth made my pulse misbehave. Then he shifted to the staff kitchen, mentioning a pasta dish the cook had made for lunch. He described the breadcrumbs toasted just right, the anchovy salt cut with lemon, the timing like it mattered. I admitted I'd helped stir the pan because the cook's hands were busy, and I'd followed instinct. I kept it simple, blaming muscle memory from old jobs. His fingers tapped his thigh once, controlled impatience leaking through. It told me he wasn't chasing flavor alone. Last came the smallest thing, the one that hit hardest, the way my thumb traced Lily's brow after I tucked her in. I'd done it without thinking, a blessing my grandmother used when she wanted kids to feel protected. Dominic's eyes narrowed, not cruel, just precise. I said some families share habits across neighborhoods, that I'd seen it in daycare centers and churches. My own voice sounded thin to me. He watched my face like he could read my footnotes. Up close, I saw the cracks he tried to hide. The suit fit perfectly, but the skin under his eyes looked bruised with sleeplessness. When he inhaled, his shoulders lifted as if pain lived there. His questions kept their polite edges, yet the room felt narrower with each one. I hated that my body noticed him anyway. The heat of him, the clean scent, the dangerous steadiness. Attraction in a cage feels like betrayal. I forced mine back to Lily. He stopped circling and landed the point. He didn't say I was lying outright, but he made it clear I knew things I shouldn't, things tied to his late wife's private world. I kept my face neutral and reminded him, gently, that my work was Lily, not his history. I offered to step aside if my presence created risk. The idea tasted bitter, because leaving meant abandoning a child mid-battle. His silence answered first, and it was not permission, exactly. He moved a fraction closer, voice lowering, and I understood the conversation had never been one. It was an assessment. He mentioned background checks as casually as weather, then let the word gaps hang in the air. My stomach tightened. Gaps were where my life bled through the seams. Years without formal addresses, jobs paid in cash, names I never used. I pictured files opening on someone's desk, my story collapsing into suspicion in seconds. I kept breathing, but barely. I told him what I could without breaking myself. I reminded him he had watched me with Lily night after night, seen every touch that soothed her, every pill logged, every spill cleaned. If I were hunting his secrets, I would have looked elsewhere. If I were dangerous, Lily would feel it. As I spoke, his eyes flicked once toward the ceiling corner, a tell that confirmed the cameras had sound sometimes. That thought made my palms damp, smile practiced. He exhaled slowly, like he was counting to keep his temper leashed. The message underneath his restraint was simple. He protected what belonged to him, and Lily was the center of that circle. If I had hidden ties, he would expose them. He didn't threaten me with volume. He threatened me with certainty. Then he added that outside eyes were watching his family, and he would not tolerate unknown variables inside his walls. I heard the lock click into place. When I left the sitting room, my legs stayed steady while my thoughts spun. I climbed upstairs like nothing happened, because Lily deserved consistency. At her door, I breathed once, then softened my face. I sat beside her bed and returned to our loop. A page, a sip, a slow count of ceiling stars. The cameras blinked from the corners. Somewhere below, Dominic's attention burned like a spotlight. I knew his next move would tighten this house around me soon. Refusing was allowed, but he made the consequences heavy for Lily. I thought of my son first, because single moms always do. Moving in meant longer hours and fewer bedtime calls, and my sister would have to cover more than she promised. I stepped into the staff hallway and texted her, asking if she could keep him overnight again. Then another night. Then however long this storm lasted. My ex would call it proof I was unstable. My bank account called it survival. I returned to Dominic and agreed, because Lily had started to reach for my hand in her sleep, and I could not be the next adult who vanished. Still, as Reed handed me a temporary access card, I felt the softest parts of my life being boxed up. I told comfort was not freedom, not here, not ever. Reed led me to the east wing, up a carpeted staircase that swallowed footsteps, past doors that required codes I did not know. The suite he assigned me had a fireplace I would never light, a bed larger than my entire apartment, and windows that looked down on gardens trimmed like secrets. The bathroom smelled of expensive soap and had a tub deep enough to hide in. For a heartbeat, I wanted to sink into it and pretend I deserved softness. Then I noticed the practical edges. A guard posted at the corridor bend, a new camera angled toward my door, and a house phone that rang whenever I tried to leave the wing without notice. Luxury can still be a leash, just padded. Even air felt scheduled, monitored, approved. By the next day, staff treated me like a permanent fixture and a potential liability at the same time. Meals were delivered to my suite unless Reed decided I could eat in the main kitchen. My car keys disappeared into a locked drawer. When I walked the grounds with Lily's day nurse, 2 security men shadowed us at a polite distance, eyes sweeping the tree line. I kept telling myself it was protection, but my skin read it as possession. The only place I felt unchained was Lily's room. There, schedules became gentler. I could sit on the floor with her books, straighten her stuffed animals, and talk about normal things like school lunches and silly cartoons, as if normal could be practiced into existence. She listened, eyes bright, unafraid. That evening I brought a small bead kit from my suitcase, the kind my son and I used on rainy weekends. Lily's gaze locked onto the colors like they were candy. I spread them on a tray and explained, softly, that bracelets can tell stories when words are hard. Red for courage, gold for victories, purple for hope, orange for happiness. She chose beads with serious concentration, lining them into patterns, then nudging my hand when I reached for the wrong color. At one point, she held up 2 orange beads and gave me the tiniest smile, as if daring happiness to stay. I laughed under my breath, and she watched me like laughter was a language she wanted to learn. For a moment, the room felt like childhood again. Dominic appeared in the doorway later, not entering, just standing where lamplight cut his silhouette into hard lines. He watched Lily thread beads, watched her lean closer to me, watched her relax as if my presence lowered the temperature of fear. I pretended I didn't notice him, because if I looked up I might admit how much his attention heated my skin. His expression stayed controlled, but something hungry moved behind it, like a man starving beside a feast he didn't trust. When Lily slid the half-finished bracelet toward him, I felt the air tighten. He didn't smile, yet his shoulders eased a fraction, and that tiny surrender scared me more than his suspicion. It made him human. I kept eyes on Lily, remembering why I was here. After Dominic left, Lily and I finished the bracelet together. I tied the knot, slid it onto her wrist, and watched her study the colors like they could predict the future. She touched the orange beads and then my hand, gentle but insistent. The meaning was clear even without words. She was happy I was in the house now, happy enough to risk believing I might stay. The sweetness of it made my chest hurt, because I knew how quickly adults break promises without meaning to. When I tucked her in, she pointed toward my wing as if it belonged to her too, and her eyes asked the question I didn't want yet. Would I be here tomorrow? And the tomorrow after that? I smoothed her hair and told myself to be careful. Moving in had changed everything for her. That night, the house felt softer than usual. Lily and I sat on the rug with the bead tray between us, the lamp casting warm circles over her hands. She kept touching the orange beads, then glancing toward my door as if checking I had not vanished. When I tucked her in, she held my wrist, gathering courage the way she gathered colors. Then she asked, with eyes that begged, whether I could be a mom to her like her mother had been. Her voice was almost nothing, but the question filled the whole room. My chest locked. I could almost hear my own son on a voicemail, asking if I would come home, and I hated that my mind went there. I took a breath and reminded myself that kids do not mean to wound us when they ask for safety. They just tell the truth. I told her I loved her fiercely and that I would stay close, but no one could replace Elena Cross. Her mother was not a role to reassign. She was the first love in Lily's life, and that love still deserved space here. I would not steal her mother's place to ease fear. Lily tried to be brave, but grief is bigger than bravery when you are 6. Her face crumpled, and tears came without sound at first, then with shivers that shook her shoulders. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled her into my arms, moving slowly so I would not startle her. I let her cry into my shirt until the fabric turned heavy. I stroked her hair and counted breaths, telling her that missing her mother meant she had been loved well. When she looked up, her eyes searched mine for a promise I could not give. I held her until she stopped trembling and softened. After she fell asleep, I went to my suite and closed the door, back against it. Anger came first, sharp and unfair. I was angry at cancer, at grown-up choices that left children paying the price, and at myself for letting Lily matter this much. Then anger drained into heartbreak. I opened my phone and remembered my son's deleted voicemail anyway. His fear that love was temporary. I covered my mouth so no sound escaped and cried until the tightness finally loosened. In that moment, I felt like a guest in every life. Useful until the crisis passed, then asked to leave quietly all over. I did not know for sure that Dominic heard any of it, but the estate had ways of listening. Cameras blinked in corners, doors closed too quietly, and vents seemed to carry secrets downward. I imagined him in a dark study, refusing to step into the room where Lily suffered, choosing screens over skin. Part of me judged him. Another part understood. Watching feels like doing something when you are terrified of doing the wrong thing. Before dawn, when I checked Lily's temperature, the house felt alert, as if someone had been awake all night. Even silence seemed to breathe around the cameras. By mid-morning, the softness was gone. Grant Mercer arrived in the front hall with a face like granite and a tablet held tight to his chest. I did not hear the words he spoke to Dominic, but I watched Dominic's shoulders set and his hands go still. Reed's staff moved faster. 2 guards appeared at the base of the East Wing stairs. When I tried to step outside for air, a security man shifted to block the door with polite finality. My badge felt like it could be revoked. Later I learned why. Men had been seen parked on the public road, cameras aimed at the property through tinted windows, taking pictures in slow bursts. They were not tourists and not neighbors. Their lenses favored the East Wing, the row of windows from my suite. That detail landed like ice. It meant I had become part of the estate's pattern, visible enough to mark. I watched Dominic read the report, rage rising, then pressed back into calculation. Protecting Lily came first, even if it meant treating everyone as risk. I watched my name slide into his world like a target. Grant's next update did not come with raised voices. It came with the kind of quiet that changes the temperature of a room. A deeper background check had returned results on my certifications, and something in the trail did not match. The agencies that should have verified my credentials had no record of the final filings. A signature stamp looked copied. A date was out of sequence. I saw Dominic turn his head toward me slowly, like a man spotting a threat in familiar terrain. The betrayal on his face was not personal at first. It was parental. I understood in one sickening instant that the house was done merely watching. It was searching. Dominic did not have to accuse me out loud for the accusation to land. In his world, forged paper meant infiltration, and infiltration meant Lily in danger. I kept my face calm, because Lily was upstairs and fear travels faster than footsteps. But inside, the ground shifted. If he pulled hard enough on my past, everything I built would unravel. I left the hall and walked back toward Lily's door, already feeling the shadow of summons behind me. Reed didn't knock so much as appear, stiffened my doorway with 2 guards behind him like punctuation. He kept his voice low, but the message was obvious. Mr. Cross wanted me downstairs now. I washed my hands, even though they were already clean, because rituals are how I keep from shaking. The walk to the study felt longer than the estate's hallways should allow. Every camera seemed brighter. Every guard's gaze stayed on me a second too long. I told myself Lily was asleep, that I could fall apart later. Dominic stood behind his desk, not sitting, as if chairs were for men without threats. A folder lay open in front of him, pages spread like evidence at trial. Grant Mercer leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes flat. Dominic didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply turned the folder toward me and let the facts speak. Mismatched licensing numbers, a missing filing record, a signature that belonged to no one. In his world, paperwork was proof of allegiance. I felt heat crawl up my neck, but I kept my posture neutral, the way I used to in family court when my ex's attorney tried to bait me into tears. I admitted the documents weren't perfect. I did not confess to motives, not yet, because Lily's room was upstairs and truth can be weaponized in this house. What I did say was simple. Lily had been safe with me. She had been cared for with consistency. Every night was logged. Every dose was on time. Every hard moment ended with her calmer than it began. Dominic's jaw tightened, and I watched his hands big, controlled, the kind that could either cradle a child or end a problem. He spoke in the language of leverage, the logic of a man who had survived by assuming betrayal before it arrived. Rivals had been photographing the property. A sick child was a weakness. A caregiver with a questionable identity was a doorway. I understood the math, and it made me furious anyway. I reminded him, as evenly as I could, that he'd been watching me for weeks. He'd seen my routines. He'd seen where my feet went, and where they didn't. Grant's gaze flicked to the ceiling corner, and the hint was enough. The cameras had not just eyes, they had ears. Dominic didn't deny it. He let the silence confirm what I'd suspected since the lullaby. That knowledge should have humiliated me, but it steadied me instead. If he had listened, then he had heard Lily's breathing shift when I read. He had heard her small, exhausted whimpers after chemo. He had heard me talk to her like she mattered. If I were an infiltrator, I was doing a terrible job of gathering anything except a child's trust. For a moment, Dominic's expression cracked, something raw moving behind the control. Then it sealed again, harder. He said he could not gamble with Lily's life on a story he couldn't verify. He also could not ignore that Lily was improving, that she was sleeping longer, eating more, reaching for comfort instead of shutting down. His solution was brutal in its simplicity. I would stay until treatment ended, because removing me now could set Lily back. But once she was stable, once the danger passed, I would leave and never contact them again. No calls, no visits, no lingering in the orbit of his family. I felt the words like a door slamming. I didn't argue. I couldn't afford to, not if it risked him sending me away tonight. I nodded once, the way you nod when you accept a sentence you didn't earn. My pride wanted to spit fire. My heart wanted to confess everything. My hands wanted to run upstairs and check Lily's pulse, just to remember what mattered. I left the study on legs that felt borrowed and climbed to Lily's room with a face I forced into calm. She was awake, eyes wet, sensing the tension the way animals sense weather. I sat beside her, threaded my fingers through hers, and began our loop again. Page, sip, stars. My eyes burned, but my voice stayed gentle. Downstairs, the estate tightened. Extra guards appeared. Doors clicked shut faster. I heard Reed's shoes in the corridor more often, like he was checking for fractures in the routine. Dominic returned to his study, and I knew, without seeing him, that he returned to the monitors too. Later that night, when Lily drifted off, I caught a reflection in the window, a faint red light from a camera. I imagined Dominic watching the screen, seeing Lily's hand wrapped around mine, seeing how she calmed when I hummed. He could call my papers forged. He could not call that bond fake. And still he chose distance, because distance was the only place his fear felt manageable. I lay awake in my silk-sheeted suite, listening to the house breathe through vents and cameras, feeling the new chill settle into the walls. The safest place for Lily was also the most suspicious. I kept thinking about the next medication adjustment, the way her body reacted unpredictably, the alarms I prayed I'd never hear. Dominic had sealed this conflict with rules instead of trust, and rules don't soften fear, they compress it. Somewhere in that compression, I sensed an explosion waiting for the wrong moment. The alarm split the night at 3:15 a.m., a sharp electronic scream that yanked me out of sleep. I was running before my brain caught up, barefoot on cold marble, hair loose, heart punching. Lily's door was half open, and the room glared with lamplight. Her small body was moving wrong, stiff and jerking, eyes unfocused, breath uneven. I did not freeze. I dropped to my knees, rolled her gently onto her side, and slid a towel under her cheek. In my head I counted seconds, because time was the enemy I could fight. I shouted for Reed and the night nurse, then hit the wall button that called security. My hands moved from training, not panic. I cleared the pillow away, kept her airway open, and watched the clock on the nightstand. The episode kept going past what felt safe. Reed burst in with a phone, face drained. I ordered him to call 911 and bring the red emergency case from the bathroom cabinet. While he ran, I checked Lily's pulse at her wrist and kept my palm steady against her shoulder. I spoke softly so she heard. Dominic arrived seconds later, still in yesterday's clothes, eyes wild with fear he tried to hide. He reached for Lily as if force could pull her back, but I blocked him with my forearm and guided him into usefulness. I told him to hold her hips still and keep his hands away from her face. His breath shook, but he obeyed, kneeling close enough to feel her heat. The cameras in the corners blinked, recording every second. For once, I didn't care who watched. I cared who lived. I needed him present, not powerful, tonight. Reed returned with the red case, and I snapped it open on the bed like a field kit. Inside were gloves, syringes, and a sealed rescue medication labeled for Lily's weight. I didn't explain the chemistry. I explained the stakes. If we didn't stop this soon, her brain and body could pay for it. Dominic's hands steadied as I asked, and he helped keep her safe while I delivered the pre-measured dose the way I had been taught. Then we waited, counting, praying, breathing. Slowly, the jerking eased, and Lily's breathing found a rhythm again. When the paramedics rushed in, their professionalism filled the room like fresh air. I gave them a clean handoff. Medication changed this week. Time the episode started, when the rescue dose went in, what her vitals looked like afterward. One medic glanced at me twice, the way people look when the resume doesn't match the skill. Dominic climbed into their space with desperate questions. But I stayed focused on Lily's color, her pulse, her lips. They loaded her onto the stretcher. Dominic grabbed his coat. I followed, because Lily's fingers searched for mine even now. The ambulance ride was sirens and fluorescent blur, my hands still smelling of alcohol wipes. At the hospital, security doors swallowed Lily into a pediatric bay, and Dominic and I were left in a waiting room that felt too bright for grief. He paced, phone to his ear, ordering more guards and more answers. I sat with my knees pulled close, replaying every second, measuring what I might have missed. When the doctor said Lily was stable, my lungs unclenched. Dominic turned toward me then, and the question in his eyes cut sharper than blame. He didn't accuse me of sabotage this time. He accused me of hiding competence. He asked where I learned to move like that, to recognize the emergency kit without searching, to speak in details that made professionals listen. The anger in him was, but beneath it was terror, the kind that makes a man grab for certainty. I felt my throat tighten. I could keep lying and keep my job, or I could tell the truth and risk everything. I chose the truth because Lily was alive, and I wanted her to stay that way. I told him about being 12, sleeping in a stairwell behind a store, fever burning through me while adults stepped around my body. My mother was gone, my father a name I couldn't prove, and I was sure the world had decided I was disposable. A woman found me before the night finished the job. She carried me to a clinic and paid for antibiotics, food, a bed, and a second chance. I did not know her full story then. I only knew her name was Elena, and she looked at me like I mattered. For years, she returned in quiet visits, never asking for gratitude. She placed me in a church-run home, paid for school, and covered nursing courses when I begged for a future that mattered. She taught me a lullaby in the dialect of her childhood, and she showed me blessing gestures that calmed scared kids. Then the visits stopped. Later, I learned she had died. When I saw her obituary online and recognized her face, I also saw Lily's name beside hers. I came here because the woman who saved me deserved her child saved too. When I finished, my hands finally started shaking. Dominic went still, like a man hearing his wife again. The anger that had ruled him all month drained into stunned silence. He stared at me, then at nothing, as if Elena's kindness had rewritten every memory he owned. My confession didn't fit his categories of enemy or employee, and he looked lost inside that gap. In the distance, I heard hospital carts and intercom calls, life continuing. Dominic didn't speak for a long time, and in that quiet I felt the first step away from suspicion. When the doctor finally said Lily was stable, the waiting room felt too bright, and my hands started shaking, not from fear anymore, but from relief. I could barely breathe. Dominic paced in tight circles, phone silent now, as if every contact had failed him, and he kept looking at me like I carried both the problem and the answer. I sat with a paper cup of coffee that went cold, replaying my confession, feeling ashamed that I had hidden Elena's name behind half-truths, even while saving her child. In my head, I kept hearing the word forged, and I wondered if he would still see me as a danger, even after watching me hold Lily's life together tonight. Dominic's face didn't soften, but it changed. The hard suspicion thinning into something like grief mixed with disbelief. The expression of a man discovering he never knew his wife fully. He asked me questions in a quieter way, not about my paperwork, but about Elena's visits, the places she took me, the way she spoke, the reasons she stayed anonymous. I answered carefully, describing her as steady and private, someone who gave without wanting credit, someone who treated kids like real people. And I watched Dominic absorb every detail silently. His fingers rubbed a ring mark on his hand, and I realized he was tracing their marriage backward, trying to find the hidden doors Elena must have walked through alone. A nurse returned with updates and let us see Lily for a few minutes, and the moment we stepped into her room, the machine seemed quieter than before somehow today. Lily's eyes opened and searched until she found us both, and even without a full voice, she made it clear she wanted my hand and Dominic's presence together right now. I leaned close and told her, in the softest way I could, that her mother's kindness was the thread that tied us here, and she didn't have to choose ever. Dominic surprised me by sitting at the bedside instead of hovering near the door, and when Lily's fingers curled around his whole body seemed to unclench at last too. He stayed until her eyelids drooped again, then walked me back to the corridor, and I could tell his mind was already rebuilding Elena into someone larger than his grief. In the hallway, he didn't offer apologies, but he offered space, The kind that said he believed my motive, even if he still needed proof for his world to breathe. Grant visited later with a thick folder of Elena's donations and notes, and Dominic's eyes moved over dates and amounts like he was meeting her again in numbers at dawn. I didn't read the pages, but I saw the pattern. Small clinics, youth shelters, school programs, and one nonprofit that matched the name of the home where she found me. Dominic's anger shifted direction, away from me and toward the danger Elena had predicted, because she kept her compassion separate for a reason that suddenly looked terrifying to him now. Back at the estate 2 days later, extra guards lined the driveway, and the cameras felt less like judgment and more like shields. Yet I still flinched when doors locked. Lily was tired but steady, her cheeks holding a little color, and she watched me unpack my overnight bag as if she needed proof I was returning each night again. Dominic began appearing at ordinary moments, not with speeches, but with actions. Bringing water, checking the med chart, and sitting through the quiet parts he used to avoid before me. That should have made me feel safe. But safety is complicated when you've learned to survive by leaving first, and my mind kept rehearsing exits like prayers every single day. I watched Lily bond to me in small ways. A bracelet she refused to remove, a glance she saved for me, a calmer breath when I entered the room first. The more she reached, the more I feared the moment she would need me and I couldn't stay, because my life had taught me that attachment comes with a bill. One afternoon, while Lily napped, I stood in my suite and imagined packing quietly, leaving a note for Reed, and walking out before anyone could argue with me at all. I told myself it would be kinder, that Lily would heal faster without a temporary person becoming a permanent wound, and that Dominic would prefer clean endings in his house. But even as I planned, I sensed danger still circling, cars slowing near the gate, unfamiliar footsteps on gravel, and guards speaking into radios with sharper urgency each new night. Dominic didn't say it, yet the way he checked windows and listened to calls told me his rivals hadn't stopped, and that my presence had changed the stakes for everyone. I looked at Lily sleeping, her bracelet colors bright against her wrist, and I felt Elena's invisible hand guiding me toward love and away from fear, again and again tonight. Still, my survival voice whispered that love was a trap, that people leave, that kindness turns into leverage, and that the safest gift I could offer was absence later on. I made the decision quietly, promising myself I would stay until Lily was fully steady, then slip away before she could lose me in the loudest way possible for her. As I turned off my sweet light, I felt the estate watching like a living thing, and I knew the next chapter would begin the moment my suitcase opened again. By the 3rd day back from the hospital, Lily's color had returned in cautious shades, and the doctor's warnings sounded less like sirens and more like rules. That was when my old instinct woke up. Leave before anyone can lose you loudly. I opened my suitcase on the ottoman and began folding clothes with the same quiet precision I used to pack lunches at 5 a.m. 2 shirts, 1 sweater, my bead kit, Lily's extra storybook I had borrowed without thinking. The suite smelled of clean linen and money, but my hands remembered cheap cardboard boxes. I told myself I could slip out at dawn, thank Reed, and vanish like a nurse on a temporary contract. If I left now, Lily would grieve, but she would not be betrayed later. I was sealing the zipper when small footsteps stopped outside my door. Lily stood there in a cardigan that swallowed her wrists, eyes fixed on the suitcase like it was a monster. She did not shout. She did not plead. Her face simply folded, and the fear in it was older than her body. She had seen people leave in uniforms and friendly smiles, and she had learned to count departures the way other kids count birthdays. She stepped closer, touched the handle, then looked up at me as if asking whether my promises were real. My throat tightened. I knelt, pulled her into my arms, and breathed with her until the tremble eased. I reminded her, gently, that today was safe, that I was still here, that her bracelet colors were not lies. Dominic found us in the hall, not with anger, but with a stillness that made the air thin. He looked at Lily first, then at the suitcase behind her, and I watched something in his expression flicker from control to worry. He did not command me to stay. Instead, he asked, in a quiet way that felt unfamiliar on him, what I needed to feel secure here. He spoke about Lily's progress, about how she slept deeper when I was nearby, about how change could unravel her. I listened, arms wrapped around Lily, and felt my own stubborn pride loosen. The fact that he asked meant he was learning presence, not just power. We moved Lily back to her room, and the moment she settled, Grant Mercer arrived with his phone already lit. His voice stayed professional, but his eyes were hard. He had intercepted chatter from Cal Russo's network. They knew Lily had been hospitalized. They knew her next oncology appointment would usually require transport. They planned to strike on the route, not to hurt her for sport, but to force Dominic into a bargain. Then Grant added the detail that turned my stomach. They mentioned the caregiver, the one who calmed Lily, the one living in the East Wing. In their math, I was leverage. Dominic's shoulders went rigid. Mine did too, for a different reason, because street survival had taught me that being noticed is the first step toward being hunted. I told them I had noticed pieces long before this message arrived. A silver sedan that parked across the road 4 times in 2 weeks, always for about 20 minutes. Always with the same driver staring at the gate, a thin scar above his left eyebrow. A habit of tapping the steering wheel when a guard turned away. I had written down the plate number on the back of a receipt, because old fear makes you document patterns. I also remembered a delivery driver who showed up outside the regular schedule, twice, each time when Lily's curtains were open and she was visible from the garden. And there was the maintenance man who claimed he was checking cameras in the East Wing. Yet he asked too many questions about Lily's routine. Grant took my plate number, typed fast, and his face tightened. The sedan was tied to a shell company connected to Russo. My small notes became proof. Dominic did not look at me like a suspect anymore. He looked at me like someone who had been standing guard in a storm while his hired soldiers stared at radar screens. Grant started issuing calls, tightening contractor lists, changing routes, canceling appointments, building a safer perimeter from the details I had handed over. Dominic listened without interrupting, then nodded once, as if he had accepted a new truth about what kept Lily alive. He said, through his posture more than words, that I was not the weak spot. I was a shield. The shift was so sudden it scared me. Being needed is dangerous. Being loved is worse. When Lily woke from her nap and reached for my hand, I made my choice. I would stay, not to repay Elena, not to earn forgiveness, but because leaving would rip open the same wound her cancer had already carved. I asked Dominic for one thing, that we handle the danger with brains, not noise, and that Lily never feel like war lived in her hallway. He agreed, and the household moved like a unit. Lights on, radios low, doors checked twice. As night fell, I sat beside Lily and felt the whole estate lean forward, ready for whatever came next. Together, for her, always. The estate braced like a body before impact. Grant tightened schedules, scrubbed contractor lists, and rerouted every appointment so no pattern could be mapped. My notes became a checklist, not a confession. I watched cameras swivel outward, and for once they felt protective, not accusing against road and trees. Dominic chose restraint that still carried teeth. He canceled the hospital run and brought the oncology team to us, then staged a decoy vehicle leaving the gate anyway. Security tracked the sedan, confirmed the driver, and handed evidence to people who could bury Russo's leverage without headlines or spectacle anywhere. By sundown the following day, the phone traffic changed. Grant reported Russo's middlemen going silent, not because mercy existed, but because risk had shifted. The gates stayed closed, yet the air felt lighter. For the first time, Lily laughed at a cartoon and I didn't flinch as footsteps echoed inside. That night, after Lily slept, Dominic found me outside where the grass smelled damp and the sky looked endless. We sat on a stone bench under stars. I told him staying meant boundaries, that family space could not be stained by his darker work. No names, no plans, no details. He listened without arguing, and the silence felt like consent. He admitted he'd spent years choosing Monster because it was efficient, then losing sleep because Lily deserved more. He promised to keep violence at the perimeter, to let this house be ordinary, warm, and to show up instead of watching. I didn't trust romance, not after my son's father taught me how quickly affection becomes paperwork. Still, when Dominic reached for my hand, he did it like a man asking permission. His palm was rough, his grip steady, and I let myself stay for one breath, then for another again. A week later, Dominic's attorneys arrived with folders thicker than my whole past. They fixed my certifications the legal way, filed my residency paperwork, and cleared the errors that made me look like a ghost. When I held the new documents, my shoulders dropped like I could breathe in daylight. They didn't just protect me. They helped me protect my son. Dominic arranged a better school bus route, a secure apartment near my sister, and a lawyer who shut down my ex's threats with calm facts. My boy stopped asking if I would disappear every time I kissed his forehead. Meanwhile, Lily's checkups became less terrifying. Dominic sat through blood draws, held her hand, and didn't look away. I watched him learn to comfort without bargains or cameras. Lily started speaking in short bursts, mostly to describe her bracelets, and she called tired of victory, as if she could win. On a Tuesday afternoon, Dr. Simmons came to the sitting room with her tablet and the careful smile doctors use before life changes. We gathered like we were awaiting a verdict. Lily leaned into my side, Dominic's arm around her shoulders, and I tasted metal fear until the room quieted. The results were clear. No cancer cells. Remission. The words landed, and my vision blurred instantly. Lily cried, laughing at the same time, and Dominic pressed his forehead to hers like a prayer. I wrapped both of them in my arms and shook from relief that had permission to live. That night, Lily told me her body felt tired, but her tired sounded lighter now. I kissed her hair and thought about all the nights we fought for mourning. For the first time, tired did not mean danger. It meant recovery, rebuilding, breathing, and the quiet courage of being alive. After Lily fell asleep on the couch, Dominic asked Grant to give us space, and the house obeyed. Dominic knelt beside me, not as a boss, but as a man trembling. He held a small box, and I already knew my answer in silence because my heart had moved in. He slid a sapphire ring onto my finger, chosen because blue matched the stars on Lily's ceiling. Lily woke anyway, pretending she hadn't, and pressed her hands over ours like she could seal us together. I said yes with tears, and Dominic exhaled as if he had been holding breath. In the weeks after, my role changed without any announcement. I stopped feeling like staff and started feeling like home. Papers for adoption began, handled quietly, and Lily picked a dress color for someday that matched her purple beads. Dominic kept choosing presence over distance, even when business demanded shadows. One Sunday evening, we sat in the garden with blankets, and Lily insisted on the lullaby that once scared Dominic through speakers. I hummed first, then Dominic joined, rough but sincere. Lily sang clearly. Inside the study, the monitor wall stayed dark, unused, forgotten because he no longer needed distance. Sometimes I still felt Elena near us, not as a ghost but as a blueprint of kindness. She saved a child in an alley and saved her family later through that child. Dominic began speaking of her with gratitude instead of only pain, and I learned to do that too. I used to believe love was temporary, a borrowed coat you returned before it ripped. Now I knew chosen family can be built from broken parts, if people stay and do the hard work. My son started calling Dominic by a nickname, and the sound felt like healing for us. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Presence is stronger than fear, and kindness can travel farther than blood. We didn't become perfect. We became honest. Together. If this moved you, tap like, share it, and tell me who saved you when nobody else stopped to.